think we are ready to start. Good morning to everyone in the US, good afternoon to attendees from Europe and Asia. And welcome to this Videojet and Center for Supply Chain Studies webinar, where the topic is how to overcome the major challenges when implementing serialization, and also where we will introduce a new business model, a new way of managing serialization projects for smaller and mid-sized CMOs. The agenda is first a quick introduction of the speakers, followed by an update on how the regulatory landscapes looks like when it comes to serialization and track and trace. And we will focus on the two big markets, the US and EMEA, but also quickly touch upon the rest of the world in this respect. Following that will be a walkthrough of what are the key elements in a serialization project based on the many years experience from the two speakers, and also summarizing some of the major challenges that companies are facing when implementing serialization, and with a few tips on how these could be overcome. Then Bob Celeste will talk about how we get the code format right, which is one of the very critical parts of a serialization project, and then speak about the new business model that we will propose for small and mid-tier CMOs. And we will end off about 45 minutes from now with a Q&A session, and then wrap up at the hour 4 o'clock Central European Time. So today I'm joined by Bob Celeste, founder of the Center of Supply Chain Studies, and I'll quickly turn over to you, Bob, to introduce yourself.
Great, thank you, Torben. Again, Bob Celeste with the Center for Supply Chain Studies, and I've been working with companies now for over 12 years on serialization and a lot of the regulations. Currently, we are working with the US FDA on their pilot programs with the DSCSA law, and excited to be here today. I think we've got some good news for you as far as implementations and how to do this economically as possible.
Thank you, Bob. Myself, I'm Torben Vogt. I'm heading up the pharma business at Videojet Technologies, and I've been in the life science industry for the past 30 years. My last 5 years I've been deeply involved in serialization, both from a implementation point of view, from a consulting point of view, and also building the serialization practice at a large life science consultant company called NNIT. Before we move into the topics, just quickly about the logistics of this webinar. It will be 60 minutes in length, including a 15-minute Q&A session at the end. If you have questions during the sessions, during the presentation, I would encourage you to post those questions in the Q&A session, which is available for you on the screen, and we would then address those at the end of the webinar. The webinar will be recorded and also available next week for all of you, as well as those that were not able to attend, at videojet.com/pharma, our pharma hub, and a link will be sent to you shortly after the webinar. If you have additional questions or comments, you can also send those to either Bob or myself at the email addresses indicated at the end of the screen. Okay, so let's dive into the actual presentation. But quickly, before we do so, I just wanted to get a quick overview of the attendees on what type of company that you are. So at the screen you will see a small poll with 4 options, and I will ask you within the next 15 to 20 minutes to put your selection in here. Okay, so what we can see here is that 7% of the audience is a contract manufacturer, and then we have a number of suppliers, and also a number of participants that is neither of the top three. So okay, let's move into the actual presentation. So Videojet, just quickly at a glance, is part of the large corporation called Danaher, which consists of 66,000 employees worldwide and present in a large number of countries around the world. 20 billion in sales in 2014 and a healthy growth year over year. Videojet is one part of the group called Industrial Technologies. We have about 3,500 colleagues around the world, offices in 30 countries, but present in 130 countries, so the rest is either agents or distributors selling our products. Pharma is one of the many verticals that we serve. Overall, Videojet is the world's largest coating solution provider, and in pharma, this is one of our major growth areas. So if we look at the world map, we are present in most countries around the world, either with offices or through agents and distributors. So we're able to support our clients almost no matter where they are, where they have their production facilities. So counterfeiting, which is really the major background for serialization and track and trace, is really a huge issue on a global scale. Both in many other industries, but for our interest here, very much within the pharmaceutical sector. It is evaluated that in the developed world, so Europe and the US mainly, the issue is that about 1% of all pharmaceuticals sold today is considered to be counterfeit. This is obviously not an exact estimate, but it's an estimate that I think there is a general consensus around. And that may not sound like a lot, but if you, for instance, in the US have, let's say, 10 million subscriptions per day, that means that 100,000 subscriptions every day is handing out counterfeit medicine. So in that respect, a significant problem. And the problem just gets worse if you move to some of the developing countries where we can have up to 30 or even more % of medications sold being counterfeit. One of the new channels and fast-growing channels for distribution of pharmaceuticals is the internet. This is an area where it gets even more difficult to control the distribution and control the spread of counterfeit product. So here there is also a lot of consideration and regulations being put in place in order to start to control this major issue. If we look at what then is done, regulations are being put in place in most of the major markets around the world, and in some countries like Turkey, Brazil, Argentina, legislations around serialization and track and trace have been in place for several years by now. But then if you go to the major markets, so Europe and the US and and Canada, as well as Brazil, then legislations is either already a law under implementation, or it's expected to come in the very near future. So this means that the serialization, meaning putting unique serial numbers on each sellable unit of pharmaceutical product and medical device, is the solution that is being put in place, and which is also creating some significant challenges for companies like yourselves and others in the industry to actually implement these rigid measures, which is believed to will have a very positive effect on the spread of counterfeit medicine. Some countries will require just serialization, meaning putting a serial number on the pack. Others will require that aggregation is made, meaning that you need to be able to demonstrate the father to child from the individual pack and all the way through the pallet. But the overall principle is that every product needs to be identified by a unique number and be transparent throughout the supply chain from the manufacturer to the point of sale. So if you look at the deadlines for the two major markets, Europe and the US, the dates where you need to be compliant with these new laws are rapidly approaching. In Europe, the Falsified Medicine Directive was put into what is called the Delegated Acts, and those Delegated Acts which specify how these Falsified Medicine Directives should be implemented was issued and published on February 2016, giving the industry 3 years to comply, meaning February 2019, soon 2.5 years from now, which is actually pretty short considering the amount of investments and resources required to implement. In the US, there is a phased approach over 10 years, starting in November 2013 when the Drug Supply Chain Security Act was signed. By January 15, the first requirements around traceability of lots were implemented, and only a year, 15 months from now, every pack needs to be marked with a unique serial number from the manufacturers, and then over the coming 2 years until November 2019, this needs to be implemented throughout the supply chain. And by 2023, we have the final deadline of the Drug Supply Chain and Security Act, involving electronic pedigree and full aggregation of products throughout the supply chain. So the clock has really started, and our recommendation is that if you haven't started, or if you're just early in the phases of implementing serialization, you really need to act now, because it does take a significant amount of time, which we'll demonstrate in a couple of minutes. So before we move on, then I just have to ask you another question here, just to get a feeling for where you are with your serialization program. So here on the screen, you have 6 options. Either this is new to us, meaning that you haven't really started yet, that you have a strategy, but you're still to get on with it, whether you have initiated a program, but it is in the early stages, whether you are well underway, or whether you feel that you will be finished before the end of this year, meaning that you are at the final stages. Or, of course, the option if none of the above applies. So I'll give you another 15-20 seconds to make your selection here. Okay, so we have half of the companies that have a program in place are well underway, and the other half has a strategy but still have not started yet. And I think that that reflects pretty well what we see in the market. We see that the major companies are well underway, but the smaller and mid-sized companies have still a long way to go. Some companies have been waiting to see whether it will go away, like a bad dream or a nightmare. Others have been waiting to see whether they are pushing the start date in order to save the investment. But as I mentioned before, we really believe that starting now is very, very important. So short about the Falsified Medicine Directive, there are really 5 major requirements. So it's not only putting a serial number on the pack, which is of course one of the requirements, to print a GS1 standard code carrier, which would be a 2D data matrix together with a readable information on the pack, which on top of what has been required already, meaning product number, batch number, expiry date, also requires now a unique serial number to be printed on the pack. And in some countries also a national reimbursement code is required. But these codes, from 4 up to 6 codes, is also named application identifiers, now needs to be put on the packs, which is a big change compared to what was done in the past. Second requirement, but also important and not very often discussed in the industry, is really that in Europe every pack needs to have a tamper-evident device. Sometimes this can be a simple label, in other cases can be a more sophisticated tamper evidence feature, but a feature that will demonstrate to the user, which has the package in the hand, that the product has not been tampered with. Third one, inspection of the active pharmaceutical ingredients is also required to have a good process for doing that and enforcing that through the regulation of good manufacturing practice and good automated manufacturing practice. And also, if anyone, whether it's a manufacturer or distributor, so anyone within the supply chain has any suspicion, whether it's a product that they see in the inventory, a product that is received, or a product that is shipped, that has a suspicion of being a falsified medicine, then there is an obligation to report this to the regulatory authorities. And finally, to address the a little bit more difficult channel to control, the internet, there is a requirement to put a logo on all products sold over the internet that can be linked through the official registers. So in the US, as we talked about, 3 main phases. Lot level management by January 15, so this has been in place for the last 18 months. Item serialization on each individual sellable product by November next year. Very soon, especially if you haven't started, this is really something you need to do. And finally, the big investment, having a item level traceability, including e-pedigree and including full aggregation throughout the supply chain by 2023. So still some years to go, but something that we definitely recommend that you think about already from the start in order to make sure that when you implement, that you take into account the end goal, which is in 2023. And the link below will actually illustrate a place where you can go and read more detailed information about this. So we have the regulations on the pharmaceutical products, but there is also a regulation in the US around medical devices. This is called a unique device identifier, and based on what type of classification the medical device is, and here we have a classification of 3 groups, class 1, class 2 and class 3, where class 3 is the products or the devices considered the highest risk of falsification or counterfeiting. They have been required to put a unique identifier on since 2014. By 2016, so this year in September, this will be required for class 2 devices, and for all devices, meaning also the class 1, the low risk devices, this will be required by 2018. In Europe, there is still no legislation in place, but it is expected that that will come in place by the end of this year, obviously giving the industry a time frame to implement this for the European market as well. So, the next phase, we will now go into talking a little about what are the key elements of a serialization project. And before we do so, I just wanted to ask you one question here, how automated your packaging production is. In some cases, packaging lines are fully automated, and that does require, of course, more technology in terms of hardware as well as software to be implemented, and in other cases it is almost purely manual. So if you could here indicate, based on your own manufacturing, in what category you would be, either no automation, meaning fully manual, less than 50%, more than 50%, or if all your lines are fully automated. And I'll give you 15 seconds to reply to this. Okay. So we have obviously most of the audience here have actually quite manual operations, which is something that is important to consider when you start or implement your serialization solution. In some cases, it might be an opportunity to implement higher level of automation, and in other cases, it is simply just an indication of what type of solution you will implement when you implement serialization. So if we look at a program, then a typical framework for implementing serialization would consist of these 6 phases. So first, a phase where you define what is your strategy, what do you want in terms of serialization, look at which people will be involved, look at what is your the goal in terms of some of the benefits that you can actually implement when you implement serialization and track and trace. And then once you have that in place, start to do your detailed analysis. So take a look at each individual packaging line, each individual equipment you have on the packaging line, and also to look at your actual IT side of the equation to see what type of systems do you have, what type of systems will need to be replaced, and what type of systems do you need to integrate the new solution to. And with that in hand, really develop the full project plan for implementation of serialization. It is also the place where you train the stakeholders, or train the people that will be involved in the program going forward. Thirdly, you have the design phase, where you actually, based on the clear definition of what you want to achieve, start to design your solution. And here we're talking both the hardware side of it, the process side of it, because some of your processes will change when you implement serialization, as well as the IT side, and also design your planning for your qualification, your testing and validation, and also to start preparing here what is called the organizational change management, but really identify how will this affect how you work within your company, because implementation of serialization will impact both your processes at the manufacturing line, the packaging line, but also in your warehouse when it comes to shipping and receiving goods. The fourth phase is actually where you build the solution based on your well-defined user requirements. You do the testing and validation of the individual equipment, and start looking at how you will integrate your systems from an IT point of view. And the third phase is really where you start building the final solution, do your OQ and PQ, and go live at the end of the project. And the sixth phase, which is something that we believe should not be forgotten, is really when, after you start going live with your solution, it does require a couple of things. One is, of course, to support the solution, make sure that you are aware about some of the negative impacts of implementing serialization, which in some cases can be a reduction, at least temporarily, in your efficiency of your packaging lines, but actually dealing with those issues after you go live, as well as measuring whether you have achieved some of the benefits that you set out to achieve when you started implementing your serialization project. And if you do this, we definitely believe that while there are a lot of challenges, this is also an opportunity to increase the value of your business and to implement some true benefits within your supply chain. As I've alluded to a couple of times, serialization is really a cross-organizational effort. It is not just putting a number on a carton. It involves quite a number of the functions within your company. So it's not just your manufacturing and your IT department, but really a big part of your organization. Sales and marketing, needs to be involved in order to forecast the volume of product that needs to go to each of the individual markets that require serialization. Very importantly, also to look at what new products will you be launching during the implementation phase at the key markets, and make sure that those new product launches, which typically is obviously a critical success factor for a company, that they are not sort of in any way hampered by the implementation of serialization. And then quality and legal as well, for obvious reasons. It requires a lot of validation and qualification. In my experience, the validation and qualification efforts when it comes to number of resources as well as to the investment is at least at the same level as the rest of the project. So looking at the cost and timeline, total investment can vary a lot depending on what level of ambition you have, whether you implement, you just retrofit new equipment for that type of equipment that is not able to live up to the requirements, or you actually use the opportunity to replace some of your old equipment with new equipment that is up to par and can actually help you get compliant. Also varying on whether you just implement serialization, meaning putting the serial number on the pack, or you actually implement aggregation from the start. And aggregation is only required today in a couple of countries, but will be required all over the world within the next 5 to 6 years. Typically the cost will be split between about 50% of the investment will be hardware, 30% on software, and the rest on consulting. And this is obviously just a rule of thumb. This can also vary depending on what type of solution you're implementing. And then the duration, which I think is an important point. The total duration can easily be to 1 to 1.5 years. I think it's rare to see quicker projects, but it can be done. And Bob will talk about one suggestion for how to do this. But overall, we can be looking at up to 24 months because what you also need to do is factor in that some of the critical hardware that you need to acquire and implement is starting to have significant lead times, as a lot of companies are now getting into the market and starting their projects, and the actual amount of supply of these hardware is smaller than the demand. So that's another reason why you need to get started as soon as possible if you haven't already done so. So before we jump into the next section here, I just wanted to give you a chance just quickly to say how many packaging lines do you have in scope in your company, whether you have less than 5, whether you have 5 to 20 lines, packaging lines meaning, 20 to 50 or more than 50. And I'll give you another 15 seconds to make your choice here. Okay, so what we can see is that the majority of the participants here are smaller companies with less than 5 lines, which obviously means that you have less to do in order to get ready. But I think what we see as the challenge for some of the smaller companies are that sometimes it may seem a small task, but the duration of the task is sometimes hampered by smaller companies getting lower priority. If the suppliers are out of supply, then you have to stand in line and wait for that to happen. So yet another reason to get in line and get started. Also, where you're selling your products, are you a local company? Are you selling within your region, meaning North America or Asia or Europe, or are you selling globally? So please, for the next 15 seconds, make your choice. Okay, so there's a pretty equal spread here, with the majority selling globally. And obviously if you have a global scope, then you also need to be aware about the different requirements, because unfortunately the requirements for serialization is different from market to market, adding to the complexity of what you need to do going forward. So finally, before I will hand over to Bob, just some of the key challenges that I've seen in my past, and which Bob has also seen in his work, that everybody is typically faced with. Obviously, the initial one is understanding what is the scope of the project. Make sure that you don't just see this as a quick fix on the packaging line to get a printer that can print the code, but it really impacts the full side of your company in many ways. Also appreciate that there are differences between what you require as a company in order to comply, and sometimes customers that may have additional requirements that you also need to fulfill when you are packaging your product and marking your product. Aligning the organization, avoiding this silo thinking, which will slow down the process of implementing serialization. It has a significant cross-organizational impact, and you need to address this up front. And as I mentioned, there will often be a negative impact on your operational efficiency, overall equipment efficiency, because you are implementing more complexity and you're implementing new processes. And this is something that good preparation can reduce the impact of, but also keep focusing on training your operators both before and definitely also after the implementation. Sometimes you would have parallel changes on some of the key systems that the serialization solution will need to integrate to, meaning that there will be a moving target in that respect, and you need to keep your eye on that. Getting the code format right, one of the absolutely critical elements of the project, and Bob will speak to this in a second. And finally, also to make sure that you have addressed the fact that there are lead times on some of the key equipment. And then there will be benefits to be had if you think about these up front and make sure that you make room for implementing these benefits. There is actually an opportunity to get a return on your investment when you're implementing serialization and track and trace. And with that, I will hand over to Bob, who will talk about getting the code format right. Bob?
Great, thanks, Torben. I think one of the things I just want to underline for everyone, as far as Torben was talking about timelines and when to get ready, is that there are a number of decisions that you need to make as you go into this process. Some of those decisions are at the regulatory interpretation level. Some manufacturers and CMOs have interpreted parts of the regulations differently. If you're a contract manufacturer, that may not be as much of an interpretation as it is a negotiation with your customer. There's different levels of risk that certain companies would take based on those interpretations. There are technical issues you need to decide on. And then, as Torben pointed out, depending on where you sell, locally or globally, your overall strategy needs to be thought through as you start to plan your physical environment and the changes that you'll make there. So it's not just a matter of jumping in and bolting equipment on production lines. It really is a lot of decisions to be made. And as I said, in the case of a contract manufacturer, these flow into your negotiations and your talks with your customers. So I'll go through a little bit about the code format. Again, my background is in the 10 years or so in the standards area, where we develop the standards you're about to see and guidelines. And you'll see that even here, there are differences in opinion, and there are decisions that you need to make and you need to talk about with your customers. And I'll explain why some of these things occurred. And then I'd like to go into a little bit about what we've discussed between Videojet and the Center for Supply Chain Studies around, I think, a unique opportunity for companies that are looking to implement, but maybe don't want to go it all on their own. So first, let's just talk about let's just talk about the format itself. So from a standards point of view, and you see a number of two-dimensional barcodes. These are GS1 compliant barcodes. So if you were to open up the GS1 general specification and leaf through that giant document, you'll see information on how to actually print and all the specifications around that barcode itself. You'll also see information about how to print in what we would term human readable underneath that barcode. And so you see the 01, which would be the identifier for that product. It could be a global trade item number or a GTIN. It could be in the US an NDC that's embedded in that. You see 17, 10, and 21. Now that's a standardized format. What you see to the right is a mix of standards and what we would call in our U.S. document human understandable talk. And the reason for this is that this was the first time as we started to create a guideline around how to implement for serialization that hospitals became very involved in discussions around what to print. So if you look at this from a hospital point of view and think about the nurse, if a nurse is about to administer something and they see a 01, 17, 10, 21, they may or may not understand what that means. However, over here, what we would term human understandable, you see GTIN, Global Trade Item Number, SN for serial number, lot number, and expiration date. Also embedded in this, and what you don't see here, is the fact that a number of manufacturers have, based on their discussions with hospitals, have limited their use of alphanumerics in the serial number. And that's from a patient safety standpoint, to limit the ability of someone misinterpreting a 0 for an O or an L for a 1 and so on. Now, lot number, obviously, we see alphanumerics there. And then you'll see a number of different formats for expiration date, depending on how you or your manufacturer identify that date. Some manufacturers don't have a day in their expiration date, and so there are certain rules around how to handle that. Now, below, you see 3 different examples of what we call human understandable, and these are real examples from certain companies that have chosen this way of doing it. This does still technically follow the standard in that the standard reads, and this is where interpretation of standards become important. The standard reads that if you are going to use the parentheses in the 0117, you have to do it in the upper left-hand corner's way of doing it. That's standardized. If you don't, then the standard is silent about what you print. And so technically, these 3 examples at the bottom, the barcode itself is standardized. In other words, the reflectancy, how it's printed, the quiet zone around that barcode, all of that is standardized. The printing that you see underneath there is not standardized, but it is necessary, and it is something that's emerging in the marketplace as far as a patient safety issue of making it clear to the clinician what they're about to administer. So those are the kind of things you need to understand. You need to understand why they're occurring, so that you can have appropriate discussions with your trading partners. And a program I'll be talking about soon in another slide or two, we'll go through that. Now, just a little bit, and this is just introducing a few clips out of the GS1 US guideline. In order to actually implement serialization and track and trace, I've estimated that you'll probably be using about 16 different GS1 standards. And that's a large amount of standards. It's a large amount of understanding of how they interact with each other. And again, like I said, a large amount of interpretation and decisions you need to make. The GS1 US guideline will help you make those decisions, or at least cut down on the number of decisions that you'll be making by yourself. But this is just some examples that you'll see in the guideline and some that you'll see in the program itself. If we look at the in the U.S., at least, there is the GTIN, the Global Trade Item Number, that's on most products in the U.S., but also in the U.S. there's the FDA's National Drug Code, and that needs to be embedded in the GTIN in a very particular way. There is a check digit at the end, and at the beginning is a code that says that this has been registered with GS1 US, and so they've taken that capacity out of their system and allowed you to use that number to form a unique number that's unique around the world. And of course, the SGTIN or the serialized GTIN you'll see has a serial number that will follow that. Within that guideline, there is also sections, as you see here, that talk about what each of the items look like, each of the attributes mean, how they're formed, both in the barcode and in databases, and how they're printed. There are examples in the guideline of how to create the GTIN properly and create that check digit properly also. So the program I'm about to talk to you about will take you through all these steps, help you make these decisions, and help you make decisions that are safe, that are not overly risky and not overly interpretive, let's say, of the standard or what your trading partners would expect. So we term this a new business model for implementation of serialization. And we say this is for contract manufacturers. However, this could be also, there's no reason why manufacturers can't be in on this program. And the reason we say this is that the thought occurred to us as we've gone through a number of these implementations that why are we doing this over and over again? Why is each company reinventing the wheel, sort of, by going through this process when almost 90% of the process is the same? And so how do we do that? How do we help medium and small companies move through this process as economically as possible? So why are we actually bringing this up? And I'll just introduce the Center for Supply Chain Studies. And this is a company that we started that is a nonprofit company, and we work with the entire supply chain along with the regulators on issues that can only be solved by the entire supply chain. We do this through education and exploration, and we use reference models as a way of dealing with complexity and for providing education on what needs to be done. And I'll show you at least screenshots of a reference model and explain a little bit about how we work with that. But essentially, we work with groups of companies to solve very particular problems. We do it in an appropriate way. So each of our calls, each of our meetings starts with an antitrust statement. We make sure that we are not talking about pricing, sales terms, territories, or anything like that that would get any company or ourselves into trouble with antitrust rules. And so this is really about learning about what needs to be implemented for the regulations, not only in the U.S. but around the world. And it's not about an individual company's deals that they're making with suppliers. So what we're proposing here is a study, or bringing together a group of companies that would like to go through this process together. And I mentioned, and I'll show you some timelines and some things that occur typically in this process of going from a non-serialized environment to a serialized environment, and then sharing that data with trading partners, not only companies that you're selling to or shipping to, but in the case of a contract manufacturer, with the company, the manufacturer that is supplying you, either supplying you with raw materials or has contracted with you to produce their products. And so again, this is about a study or working together as a group and moving through that process. So the goals of the study. What I've noticed is that contract manufacturers are starting to receive conflicting requirements regarding that DSCSA implementation. And the reason is there's actually three reasons. There's the law itself, which in and of itself has some measure of interpretation that needs to be made. There's your customer's interpretation, the manufacturer's interpretation of what the law requires. Then there's, on top of that, a number of things that are not written into the law at all, yet are required in order to meet certain other things. And then an example of that is the whole area of aggregation. Do I need to look at every individual item that goes into a case or a bundle? There's nothing in the law that says that you do or don't have to do that. Yet at the same time, you need to know what you're shipping to your trading partner, so that brings that into effect. Certain manufacturers, and it really does depend on your contract with your customer, on what it is that they do and what it is that you do in terms of collecting data, and sharing it with who. It could be sharing it back to the manufacturer. It could be sharing it with a third-party logistics company that may be shipping the product. It could be to the next company in the supply chain, say a wholesaler, or it could be direct to the hospital or the retail institute. But part of this is law. Part of this is your contract with your customer, and part of this is interpretation. So we're proposing a study where we'll take a number of contract manufacturers or manufacturers also together and walk and move through that process together. So what does that mean? It means that there are certain things, and I say 90%, but it could be more. There's certain things that you're going to do as you go through this process of interpreting the law, making your decisions, choosing your hardware and software, and then connecting the trading partners that everybody is going to do. You're all going to go through the same kind of process and end up in the same situation of trading not only products but information. And so why don't we go through that together, rather than each one of you spending the money to have either a consultant or someone like that lead you through the process individually. It makes it easier for yourself because it provides a level of security that you're going through a process that's been vetted. It makes it easier for hardware and software manufacturers to show a group of small manufacturers or contract manufacturers their products and respond to a common request for proposal rather than a number of them that are slightly different and are some are differently formatted and so on. But it allows you also to save on fees. Again, a number of companies that are supporting the study, all walking through the same process. You can make your own individual decisions as to what you're purchasing, but you've gone through the process together, and we see that as a nice economical way of at least taking some funds out of that process and the RFPs and so on that you'll go through. So again, like I said, our experience is that as we move from one company to another and interact with them, There is a very, very big, large common element in the roadmaps and the plans for all CMOs and all manufacturers. There's a difference between a CMO, obviously, and a manufacturer, but at the end of the day, there really isn't much difference between what everybody needs to understand and the decisions they need to make. This study would allow you to have a consistent way of implementing and moving through the process. And you'll also have access to some very good people who have been through this process already a number of times. As Torben said, as we start getting closer to these dates, and certainly we've already passed a number of dates, these advisors, or rather the people that really understand what's going on and understand the intention of the FDA and what's happening, are becoming very, very much in demand, and the likelihood that you'd be able to attract someone that can actually lead you through the process in a planned out way is becoming harder to find the folks. So we're able to provide those folks to a group of people, again, sharing the costs, sharing the learning, and moving you safely through that kind of process. So again, the timeline is that Torben was talking about, but just some issues around that's occurring that you need to understand, that you're actually shooting for a moving target here in some manners of speaking. So here we are in 2016, and a year from now, you need to have serialized product on the market. And yet, the FDA still hasn't published a number of guidances that could affect what you're doing. One of those being grandfathering. So how much product is in the market, and that the FDA will allow to move through the market once serialization takes effect. That could affect your production levels and your production as you move forward into 2017. How much product do you need to keep on hand that's non-serialized? How much of that may be grandfathered, and how much of that maybe not be grandfathered? And there's another number of other decisions that the FDA needs to publish this year, and we're already halfway through this year, that will affect what you're doing with your implementations. As I said before, if you are a CMO, you are dealing not only with the regulation, but you're dealing with your customer's interpretation of that regulation, and you're also dealing with servicing your customer based on your negotiation about who does what going forward. Additionally, the format of sharing that data, so from an IT standpoint, some of those areas have not yet been decided on. And so, again, this is a bit of a moving target, and that will change over time. So it's not just a matter of putting a barcode on a product. There are some varying solutions that have taken place, and it's not as easy as you may think, connecting at the level of today it's EDI, tomorrow we believe it will be a different standard produced by GS1 that will be going through. And as we start to hit 2023, where you start to see full traceability, in other words, trading partners will need to be able to contact possibly you, depending on your contract, depending on who you are, about your shipments to other customers. And so data governance, security, and access are going to become very, very large issues. If you think about just in the US, there are 64,000 pharmacies, all of which, if an FDA or a State Board of Pharmacy inspector walked into their pharmacy, would need to contact you electronically. So we need to be understanding about what that means. And there are a number of items that have yet to be understood and are still being worked on with the FDA. This is just an example of a plan that we would go through together. And again, you certainly are capable and able to make up your own plans, but These are things that have been worked in the past well and that we would go through together as a group. We do have a method for walking through the programs, and then we also use reference models or simulations in order to work out some issues, especially, and this is just, I know you won't be able to read this, but especially in the CMO or contract manufacturer area, these look like drawings and not very good ones, but they actually run. This is actually a simulation that will run, and as we have discussions within that group, we will make changes to the simulation so that you have a good blueprint for your implementation. And also we'll have other uh, folks that are in the supply chain, so you have an idea of what they're going through as they are possibly receiving data from yourself or from the manufacturer. So, if you'd like to learn more, please contact me about this study. Again, the study is about taking a number of manufacturers and contract manufacturers through the process of implementing for DSCSA compliance. We'll have to sign a number of antitrust agreements so that we are doing this legally and walking through. We'll probably have a number of pre-launch calls and then kicking off the group and moving forward.
Thank you, Bob. I hope that you will find this as an interesting and a creative way to actually address both the time issue, but definitely also the investment and resources required, because it will for sure help you find ways of reducing that challenge and working together with others to collaborate. So we are a little behind schedule, but nevertheless we have 2 or 3 minutes left for questions. So if you have questions, again, please post them in the Q&A section on your screen. We had 2 questions come in during the presentation here. The first one is sort of, do you expect aggregation to become a requirement in Europe, even though it's not part of the actual regulation, the Falsified Medicine Directive? I think that's something that is often discussed. I think while it is not a part of the actual regulation and laws, I think the supply chain partners themselves would put pressure on the manufacturers to do aggregation, because it will ease the handling of the goods throughout the supply chain significantly. We know for a fact that in the US, where aggregation will be a requirement at 2023, that already now some of the big wholesalers are actually, like McKesson, is actually writing to their suppliers and saying that if they want to do business with them, then aggregation is a requirement. So it's not by law, but it's by demand from the big supply chain players where this will come. Second question was, what is the most effective way to address the change management? We briefly touched upon this, that change management is an important factor. I think in my experience the most effective way is really to make sure that everybody is involved, everybody that will be impacted is involved at the early phases of the program, even though it might not be until later that they will be affected, but that everybody can actually give input and have a say early on, and that you identify all the different places within your organization where this is having an impact. And then focus on training. I think training is probably one of the most important factors in order to ease the change and in order to reduce the impact of the negative impact of efficiency on your packaging lines. See here, we have another question here. What is the reason for the serial number being 14 or 21 digits long? I guess that's one for you, Bob.
Sure. So the standard says that it could be up to 20 alphanumeric characters. Now, the biggest reason for this is that some of the manufacturers, the larger manufacturers, have agreed that they're going to keep it numeric. So that's one thing. The second thing is, if you look at a two-dimensional barcode, it's got duplicate data in it. And as you add data to that barcode, it'll stay the same size until it hits a certain point, and then it'll jump and it'll become larger. So with randomization, you could see on your production lines a barcode that is jumping back and forth between two different sizes as each bottle comes through. So that's why you see manufacturers making a particular decision to keep it at a certain size and put a number at the beginning so that the zeros are not being truncated and so on, is to stabilize that barcode on the product so that cameras can pick them up better. That's one of the thought processes.
Thank you, Bob. One final question here. Can Videojet supply the solution for all the requirements mentioned? I think the answer to that is Videojet as a single company cannot, but through our partners, both partners on vision equipment, consulting companies, and advisors like the likes of Bob, and also integrators, we definitely can supply a full solution end-to-end to meet the serialization requirements. What I will also direct you to is really what we call our Pharma Hub, where the link is shown on your screen, and you can also find it if you go to videojet.com or videojet.co.uk/pharma. You will find a lot of useful information, studies, requirements, products, and so on, that will illustrate to you what different types of solutions are out there and can be used for your requirements. And finally, before we end up, I will encourage you, if you have questions that you come to your mind after we close this call, please don't hesitate to contact either Bob or myself. The emails are in the presentation, where we are more than happy to give you responses also after. And also, if you want to have a more detailed chat, we can set up meetings where we bring other people to the table that can help you address those questions you might have. So thank you very much for your time and attention. Sorry that we went a little over time, but I hope that you found the webinar interesting. There will be a link to a recorded version of the webinar, so if you have people in your company or in your network that you feel could benefit from this information, please feel free to send them the link, and hopefully they will find it useful as well. Thank you very much, and have a good day.